How you doing? This is Kenny Lee Roberts, and this song is called Fires on the Hilltop. Listen to it, it's very good.
When they tell the story, what will they say?
You've written a song about war.
Yes.
So keeping the theme of
keeping it light. Yes.
So how long ago was this?
This is on the last album. It's on the Triggerfish album, called Fires on the Hilltop. So it was we actually has one of the few that has made it into the live set, which we're going to be playing at Inverary. It was again, you get a lot of inspiration when you watch TV, you watch films or whatever, and it was all the various landmark celebrations of D-Day and victory in Europe and all these things going on. You always see this kind of old footage of the sort of, particularly D-Day landing, with the landing crafts go down and all the black and white footage. But it was watching a lot of documentaries and watching a lot of interviews of basically kids that were going out, and it was World War I and World War II. It was, 17, 18, 19-year-old thinking this is some great adventure we're going on here. And the song is about going out as children, basically, which they were, and coming back as broken men. It's just, that's not what I thought it was going to be, and it was always about how it was the lucky ones that came home. But again, sort of tying in with a sort of mental health thing, they didn't know what that was back in the day. They came back in one piece, more or less, but they weren't the same person, and they struggled mentally with what they'd seen, what they'd been through. And because it wasn't a visual scar, it wasn't really talked about or treated. I remember my mum always saying about her dad coming back, and he says he wasn't the same guy, and she was a young girl, didn't really recognise this guy, and again, God only knows what they've been through and what they've seen, and that's going to affect you mentally. So they weren't. Yes, they were lucky in the respect that they came back, but that wasn't the end of their battle. They had a lot going on in their head. So again, it wasn't set up in those days to less so to do. We sort of deal with post-traumatic stress now, thankfully, with any of the armed forces that come back now, but they didn't have any of that. So
I think it was a label. Do you remember any stories from did you get...
I wasn't in the war.
Oh, no, I know you weren't in the war. What was it like for you?
It was very tough, yes. I had powdered egg. Yeah.
What about your granddad? Did you get to meet him?
I didn't know my two granddads. I never knew them. I had a great granddad who was a great character, one of these kind of west of Scotland guys with massive hands, shipbuilding guy who would just scoop you up. It was a very, very kind guy. I remember him. I had my two grannies, which would relate a lot of stories. We'd go and see them. You got your grand's house in Shettleston, and you would see her piano with loads of sort of marks all over. So what's that? So that's shrapnel when it hit the piano. And God. So you tell you all the stories. Then she'd sit you down and you play with a box of lead soldiers. So you'd be sitting there chewing lead soldiers. Soldiers going, tell me, Gran, about the war while I hallucinate. So it was. So you got a lot of stories, and my mum remembers, being scooped up with the air raid sirens went off, and sort of looking up and seeing the flak going and stuff. So they have little dotted memories, but my grands were good for filling in, because I always asked, what was this like? What was that like? But yeah, you just can't. You always think that was ages and ages and ages ago. It's generational for us.
I know, it's crazy.
I couldn't think what it would have been like.
It's interesting because you'd think like mental health would be getting better now that we live in a world where technology is more advanced. We don't necessarily have as much of a struggle to get food, and I think of the rations and housing and all that sort of stuff, yet it almost seems like it's getting worse.
It is, and I think a lot of these things, these advancements are culpable with some of the problems. I think, you look at the even the sort of VE celebrations, it was that community spirit. We've lost a lot of that. I think a lot of people looking out for one another. We seem quite intent on inflicting hurt on people, and that's more fun, and it's just a bit of banter, it's just a bit of that, and the kind of looking out for one another spirit is that's suffered a wee bit, I think. We could have learned a lot from the way it was, I think, to be honest, and take the good bits and some of the older bits, and somewhere in between, I got a good model, I think.
Yeah.